So, my PhD on movie success in 10 minutes, or it's free, by me, Dr. J.T. Velikovsky, PhD. So, you know how they have tweet my thesis in a line or less? Well, this is my PhD conclusion. Some movies succeed, others don't. Why? Because evolution. Or more specifically, because human nature and evolutionary psychology. People like some things and don't like other things. Interestingly, Charlie Kaufman's first feature film was called Human Nature. Very funny movie. Most people haven't seen it. Anyway, there's a lot more about evolutionary psychology on my StoryAlity PhD blog. But here's the thing. The movie industry is a system. There's large audience. People still keep seeing movies at the cinema. They like some, which become the canon. They don't like others, which become archive. And people keep writing and coming up with new ideas for new ones, and people go see them. But enough about me. What about you? What do you think of me? So a bit about me. When I was 13, I first illustrated a children's book. Then I worked in television, and then in bands. Then I wrote the feature film screenwriter's workbook when I was at film school in 95. Made short films, interactive phone soaps, augmented reality games, interactive comics, million-selling video games, movies, books, other movies, other books, and finally this PhD. So about 20 years of immersion in the domain of cultural production, I guess. You may know me from this, the feature film screenwriter's workbook from 1995 and revised edition 2011. It's got 1 million downloads, and I summarized all the major screenwriting advice that existed when I was at film school, all the script gurus, and boiled them down into a page. A lot of people find it useful, but I think it's only about 50% right now, having since done my PhD. One thing is important to look at the data sets that are being used when we come up with guidelines for screenwriting successful movies or plotting profitable pictures. Anyway, you can download my PhD on my StoryAlity PhD weblog. So, by all means, please do. I think all good PhDs should tackle a real-world problem. Here's one. 7 in every 10 movies lose money. So in every 10 feature films, 2 of them make money, 1 of them breaks even, and about 7 lose money, the big red bit. Try not to be in that bit. And so maybe do what the high ROI films do, and do less of what the bottom 20 ROI films do. So you can see here, if we look at the 0% ROI mark, everything to the right, that 30%, makes money, and everything to the left, the other 70%, loses money. So I looked at 2 data sets, the top 20 ROI movies, and on the top left, the bottom 20 ROI movies, and comparing those 2 data sets for story guidelines, screenwriting guidelines, movie making guidelines, just general creativity. Nobody else had done this before, so I waited about 20 years and then figured I better do it myself. So that's the name of my PhD, Communication, Creativity and Consilience in Cinema. And as I say, it's a free PhD online. It's a PDF. By all means, download it and enjoy, comparing the top 20 ROI to the bottom 20 ROI. So the data source is thenumbers.com, looking at the top and bottom 20 ROI films. There's the top 20. What does ROI mean? It just means audience numbers or box office divided by production budget times 100 at a percent. So a movie that made 10 times its budget is 1,000% ROI, but some movies make 70 times their budget or 7,000% ROI. For example, the top 20 ROI movies. And so these are all worth studying for a great many factors, from story elements character, screenplay, dialogue, everything. Here's some counterintuitive results from the PhD, just a snapshot of some of them. There's about 30 findings. 15 out of 20 of the top 20 ROI are independent films or non-Hollywood films. Only 2 of them had name directors, Lucas and Spielberg. None of them had big marketing budgets. Marketing won't make your film more successful. The story will. All 20 were created by writer hyphenates. That's interesting from a creativity point of view. So writer actors, writer directors, writer producers, or all 4 at once. And then story-wise, there's a lot of interesting findings that come out of it as well when we examine the top 20 ROI and compare those to the bottom 20 return on investment movies. Call them movies rather than films. Films are like art, like Stanley Kubrick, who's my favorite filmmaker, whereas movies are more like entertainment. So just depends whether you're making art or entertainment, I guess, but these are the popular or more viral films, so they had the smallest budgets, yet the biggest audiences. So they used creativity. So I looked at about 16 things in all of the movies: story premise, theme, genre, spatial setting, time setting, the plots, character and characterization, do they have character arcs or not, the structures, dialogue, how long are they on average, number of scenes, what about dramatic principles, going right back to Aristotle, only about half of which is right because he was looking at theatre and not cinema, which was invented a long time after he died. And looking at creativity from a scientific study of creativity perspective, and mostly looking at human nature or evolutionary psychology, evocriticism, consilience. So people like E.O. Wilson, Brian Boyd, Joseph Carroll, John Gottschall, Daniel Dennett, a lot of these people were the background theorists who seem to shine an evolutionary lens on understanding cultural creativity and how biocultural creativity works, and mainly the scientific study of creativity. Anyway, there's a lot of recommendations that come out of looking at the top 20 and the bottom 20 ROI movies. So these are recommendations when you're creating your story, screenplay, movie, and how to leverage creativity so that your story reaches the widest audience for the least production budget, like the top 20 ROI, and hopefully avoid all the pitfalls of the bottom 20 or the films that were made for the biggest amount of money and had the smallest audiences, which is something you really don't want to do. Anyway, by all means read the PhD. This is just kind of a snapshot of some of the findings from looking at these 16 elements across all 40 films of the dataset, or 40 movies, I should say. So, how often do top 20 ROI movies happen? Roughly every 2 years. So this suggests they are emerging from a system. And I also graphed the number of scenes and number of minutes in the top 20 ROI. There's a trend moving towards 90 minutes and 90 scenes on the left as ROI increases to the left. So there's an interesting finding. Let's see if that prediction is borne out by the next highest ROI film. And I made an agent-based model of creative practice theory just to model the entire film industry as a system, with producers, writers, and audiences, and noting the 10-year rule in creativity, and it takes about 10 years to learn screen and master screenwriting, and 98% of screenplays don't get made, and of that 2% that do get made, only 30% break even. And the background study of the scientific study of creativity drew heavily on Csikszentmihalyi and D.K. Simonton, and looking at the standard definition of creativity, psychological studies of creativity, the systems model of creativity, Bourdieu's practice theory, which is very similar, memetics, study of units of culture, because a film is a unit of culture, holons and partons. This is where it all gets into complexity science and complexity theory and big data. So most of us can get overwhelmed by the complexity of this, but there it is nonetheless. Analyzing and then synthesizing. And the PhD has a background in consilience, Wilson 98. So the middle part there where the sciences, social sciences and the arts all overlap is where consilience likes to be. So the vertical integration of knowledge, looking at culture all the way down through sociology, psychology, biology, everything to mathematics, and then synthesizing all the way back up again to break down the parts and then understand them and put back together as a whole. How does the whole system work? And emergence, concepts like this. Also out of the PhD emerged a couple of chapters I published. I discovered the holon-parton structure of the meme, the unit of culture. So that was a chapter in creative technologies for multidisciplinary applications, and it was republished this year in the Encyclopedia of Information Science and Technology. So that's on the StoryAlity blog as well. You can download those chapters. So here's where I've also synthesized Csikszentmihalyi and Bourdieu. So you have a person or agent born into a personal bio-socio-cultural environment, and they have their own life history, develop a habitus or feel for the game, and navigate the field, internalize a domain, such as the domain of knowledge around movies and storytelling, acquire cultural capital, and if they're lucky, after about 10 years, create an artifact that the field or the social system judges creative. So this just sort of shows how I combine Csikszentmihalyi and Bourdieu systems model of creativity and practice theory into creative practice theory to understand how successful movies happen. And so that's another interesting background part of it, modeling all these systems and how they work. It's cycling through again. And so also the reason symbolic capital or awards and recognition is in the middle there is because you need all the other elements before that final element can fall into place. But mind you, only one of the top 20 ROI films won an Oscar. That was the best picture. That was Rocky. I also made a game demo of creative practice theory to show how all this works. I modded Kudos by Positech Games, so just an educational tool for anyone wanting to understand better how creative practice theory works. And this is sort of the steps one goes through. You're born with your bio-psycho-socio-cultural background and individual talents, develop a feel for the game of movies and screenwriting, absorb that domain through films, books, courses, the web, word of mouth, internalize the domain, practice your craft skills, and that's where the 10-year rule in creativity comes in. Navigate the movie field, find a position in it as a screenwriter or producer or director or actor, whatever role, acquire those different forms of capital, money, social capital, relationships, cultural capital, knowledge, experience, implement a creative work, and if you're lucky, that work is judged creative by the socio-cultural field, and if you're even luckier, you might acquire awards for such work, and repeat. And so there's lots of transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary components of this sort of a study, because film sort of involves many different fields, and I won't go through them, but that's the majority of them there. And so yes, comparing dataset A, the top 20 ROI films, with dataset B, the bottom 20 return on investment, or the biggest money losers. So as I say, you can download the PhD from StoryAlity PhD weblog, and I hope it's helpful. The PhD is a free PDF online. And so there you have it. The PhD thesis comparing the top 20 and the bottom 20 ROI movies for story, screenplay, and film. That is my PhD on movie success in 10 minutes, or it's free. Thank you. Enjoy.